Alarm sirens shrieked, tearing the Camran sky. The ground shook violently, tremors spreading throughout the base. From the horizon, dozens of white streaks of light sliced the cloud layer, trailing a long, horrifying shriek. That was a barrage of ballistic missiles, tên lửa đạn đạo, approaching from the sea. In a few seconds, the entire base seemed to awaken. Vietnamese air defense launchers flared simultaneously. Launch tubes traversed. Missiles spewed blazing red fire, soaring into the sky, trying to create a desperate shield. Engine roar merged with the blast sounds, creating a colossal symphony of war. The Camran sky flared brightly. Missiles on both sides collided, creating massive fire halos exploding in mid-air. 3 enemy rounds were halted, shattering into blazing red metal fragments raining down. The runway was torn up, trucks were tossed, hangar roofs shook violently as if about to collapse. But the defense system could not stop everything. 7 other missiles pierced the fire net, plunging straight into the base center. 1 missile struck the main radar station. Fire erupted fiercely. The colossal antenna mast collapsed, pulling down a thick cloud of dust. The next round struck the command area, shaking the entire main building. Windows shattered, smoke and fire covered the whole zone. 2 others struck the ammunition depot on the base perimeter. A short moment of silence, then the entire ground seemed to explode. A colossal fire column rose high. A terrifying secondary explosion tossed everything. The shockwave swept across the entire pier. The ships shook violently. Water washed over the deck. Smoke spiraled straight up, blocking the daylight. Amidst the smoke and dust, the commander's voice still echoed over the loudspeaker. Hold position, no retreat. Activate secondary air defense. Rescue teams, technical soldiers, firefighters rushed into the rain of dust. Firelight reflected on the water, making the whole base glow like a blazing red mass. The sound of bending metal, the shriek of shells, men calling each other merged into a single sound. The roar of war. Cam Ranh, the most important naval center in central Vietnam, was submerged in a true firestorm. And that was only the first minute of the attack. Black smoke still spiraled thickly over the Cam Ranh sky. The entire base was submerged in the sound of alarms, burning fire, and people calling out amidst the rubble. A temporary command post was set up right by the pier, where surviving officers gathered, eyes fixed on the backup radar screen. Missile signals still in the air. Prepare for the second intercept wave. The commander's rough voice echoed over the internal speaker. Immediately, the remaining air defense units traversed their barrels, activating systems. Soldiers, though their uniforms were scorched, still rushed to load ammunition. Heavy anti-air rounds were lifted with trembling hands in the heat. In the air, 7 new streaks of light reappeared. They rushed in from the north, slicing the cloud layer like blazing knives. The shrieking wind grew louder, making the sea outside the pier surge violently. The entire base held its breath. Then the first Vietnamese rounds left the launchers, tracing soaring light trails in the sky. Explosions followed explosions. Flashes flared constantly, like lightning in the daytime. 1 enemy round was struck, shattering in the air, burning fragments falling into the sea, creating a chain of continuous, echoing boom sounds. But 4 other rounds still broke through. The first missile plunged into the submarine base area, exploding less than 100 meters from the pier. The entire water surface rose like a wall, slamming into the docked ships. A ship listed heavily to one side, metal shrieking piercingly. Soldiers on deck no longer waited for orders. They immediately maneuvered, lowering lifeboats, moving the wounded from the fire zone. Engine noise, screaming, the sound of boiling water merged. Every passing second carried the smell of smoke, oil, and echoing blasts. In the sky, a Vietnamese fighter jet roared, slicing through the clouds, charging straight toward the launch direction. The pilot barely spoke over the radio, only the control voice echoed, "Defend the base at all costs." The aircraft flashed brightly, launching 2 air-to-air missiles, successfully intercepting another round. Before it could plunge down, the blast created a shockwave, shaking the entire port area. Cheers erupted from the loudspeakers, But before they could finish, the 2 remaining rounds struck the ground. One exploded in the logistics area. A column of black smoke spiraled hundreds of meters high. The other struck the submarine maintenance bay, shaking the entire area like thunder. All glass shattered, steel doors flew open. Successive shockwaves swept through, leaving only a sharp ringing in the ears. Despite heavy losses, the base had not fallen. The fires were being suppressed. The survivors still held on. The remaining anti-air artillery units continued traversing their barrels. Cam Ranh was still alive and ready to counterattack. Smoke and fire still covered the base. Offshore, Vietnamese frigates urgently split formation, widening the defense perimeter. Radar on deck recorded a series of new signals from the east. A Chinese naval squadron was advancing into Cam Ranh Bay. The second alarm signal sounded. The sustained siren wail, mixed with wind and waves, reminded everyone the nightmare hadn't ended. On the pier, long-range cannons were activated. Soldiers ran along the ship decks, checking breaches, loading shells. Ship captains yelled loudly over the radio. All ships ready for combat. Target east, 25 nautical miles away. The sea was violently rough. High waves lashed the ship hulls, splashing water mixed with thick oil smoke. From afar, the Chinese warships were visible. Multiple flashes on the horizon signaled their naval guns were firing. The first shells rushed in, shrieking long in the air. The sea surface exploded, water shooting high like a waterfall. One round skimmed past the frigate HQ-012's side, tearing the protective steel layer. Sailors were thrown down, but still held tightly to the helm. Immediately, the ship's 76mm cannon countered, firing 3 consecutive rounds, rushing toward the enemy fleet. The sky turned ash-gray. Thunder, wind, smoke, and explosions merged. Individual Vietnamese ships began countering. Coastal artillery batteries also opened fire, each shell leaving the barrel drawing a long streak of light, rushing out to sea like living lightning. A Vietnamese shell struck the target. The round exploded right on the Chinese ship's side. Smoke and fire rose high. The vessel lurched. Its radar system went dead. The entire base cheered over the radio. But just seconds later, a counter-barrage echoed back, shaking the entire port area violently. At the temporary command post, the Cam Ranh commander stood by the electronic map, sweat beading on his forehead, his voice ringing clearly. All naval artillery units focus on the center formation. Don't let them advance another nautical mile. Coastal cannons opened fire simultaneously. Continuous explosions. The ground shook like a rising wave. Soldiers covered their ears. Dust and sand flew everywhere. Long white smoke plumes stretched for kilometers, creating a protective curtain around the base. Offshore, the 2 naval lines were closing in. Every explosion made the sea surface surge. Light from the fires reflected on the hulls, making the whole area blaze red. The Cam Ranh sky was no longer blue, it had turned into a dome of fire, where every streak of light was life or death. In that instant, a young officer yelled over the radio, "We are holding position, Commander. The base still stands firm." But everyone understood. This was only the prelude. The real war was still coming. From the north, the air vibrated with the sound of jet engines. Thin white smoke trails appeared in the sky, then quickly spread into a V formation. The Chinese fighter squadron had appeared, diving toward the Cam Ranh sea area. On the Vietnamese frigate deck, the surveillance radar immediately reported a signal. Alarm sirens echoed throughout the ship. Alert pilots in the base had no time left to wait for orders. They launched their jets continuously, each one shrieking, pulling a white smoke plume, charging straight into the confrontation zone. The sky turned into an arena. Small specks of light tore the space, interwoven with blast sounds and flashes. Air-to-air missiles were launched, creating blazing, curved streaks. A Vietnamese fighter banked sharply, firing 2 rounds consecutively, striking the target. The enemy aircraft exploded dazzlingly, turning into a black smoke trail falling onto the sea. Beneath the water, the shockwave from the explosion spread, hitting the ship hulls, causing sailors to lose balance. They clung tightly to the railing, still maintaining their post. An officer yelled loudly over the radio, "Hold formation. Do not disperse. Shield the submarine base area. The Chinese side did not stop. The 4 remaining jets plunged low, firing a rocket volley onto the anti-air cannon emplacements along the shore. Sand and earth flew up. Black smoke columns rose high. One cannon emplacement was struck, exploding like a torch. But from the ship decks, Vietnamese gunners countered immediately. Individual anti-aircraft rounds roared, piercing the clouds, exploding brightly behind the jet's tail. Another enemy jet was struck, the fuselage blazing fiercely, but it flew for a few more seconds before exploding in the air. Cheers erupted from the loudspeakers, but instantly, another rocket struck the pier area. Water and steel were tossed up like rain. The shockwave flung multiple supply containers into the sea. Smoke, fire, wind shrieks, and groaning metal merged into a single sound, the sound of real war. The entire base was submerged in the red glow of the flames. On the temporary command post, the chief officer's voice echoed hoarsely but firmly. No retreat. Cam Ranh base is the final shield. Everyone, hold your positions. The remaining units simultaneously replied over the radio. Only one word. Clear. Amidst the sea of fire and smoke, the Vietnamese ships still held formation. Each cannon shell sounded steadily. Each streak of fire still rushed into the air, forming a blazing wall preventing the enemy from closing in. Cam Ranh had not yet fallen, and the fire of combat was raging fiercer than ever. The sea wind stung their faces, carrying smoke and the dense smell of burnt oil. In the distance, the water surface blazed red as if boiling. Cam Ranh base still stood firm, but the atmosphere on the pier was taut as a bowstring. Vietnamese frigates simultaneously dispersed, holding a fan-shaped formation, to block the approaching direction of the enemy fleet. On the bridge, officers clung to their headsets, the coordinator's voice rough. The enemy's entering cannon range. All naval artillery units prepare to fire the first salvo. As the order ended, echoing booms exploded. Dozens of cannon barrels fired together. Firelight covered a corner of the sky. Individual shells rushed off, tracing curved light trails in the air, then plunged into the sea a few nautical miles away. Water rose into a column, creating a thick white smoke screen, obscuring radar visibility. From the distance, returning streaks of light countered the enemy open fire. Shells fell near the pier, exploding in a long chain sequence. The ground shook, waves slammed the ships, making the deck slippery. Sailors still held on, loading shells without pause despite fire close to the gun barrels. A Vietnamese patrol boat was struck by a skimming shell. Fire erupted in the midship compartment. Rescue teams immediately rushed, both fighting the fire and pulling the wounded inside. No one left their post. The cannon on the ship's bow still operated. Each round left the barrel, shaking violently. At low altitude, 2 newly launched Vietnamese fighter jets dove toward the enemy formation, firing a volley of air-to-ground rounds. Streaks of fire fell into the sea, exploding brightly amidst the thick black smoke. An enemy warship was struck, the deck blazing like a colossal torch. The coordinator's voice sounded over the radio. Maintain firing range. Don't let them advance deep into the bay. Cam Ranh must be held at all costs. Every soldier, from ship deck to coastal gun emplacement, knew clearly, if this base fell, the entire central coast would be exposed. No one retreated. Explosions still followed each other. The sky was mottled with firelight. Every minute passed, the sea gained another black smoke streak, another blazing red streak. But in that hell, the flag on the pier still fluttered fiercely in the wind, as a reminder that Cam Ranh was still fighting. That afternoon, the Cam Ranh sea surface blazed. The sky was torn by dozens of crisscrossing black smoke trails. Vietnamese warships still held formation, each moving as if controlled by an unseen hand, precise, synchronized, and resolute. From the command post, an urgent signal was transmitted. Enemy is increasing long-range firepower. All units ready for the next artillery wave. Immediately, the roar of the enemy naval cannons echoed again. Large shells rushed in like meteorites. They shrieked through the air, exploding on the sea surface, water shooting up like mountains of waves. One round struck near the logistics depot, tossing fuel barrels. The flames spread fast. Black smoke spiraled up, covering the entire port area. On the ship HQ-015, the captain yelled loudly, "Don't let the fire spread to the magazine. Put it out immediately. Fight and firefight simultaneously." Human voices, engine noise, the sound of boiling water merged. Soldiers rushed through the smoke, covering their mouths with sleeves, continuously spraying fire hoses. The flames were slowly pushed back, but the sound of explosions echoed from afar again. Offshore, a Vietnamese frigate traversed its entire firepower toward the enemy. Individual shells left the barrel, the firing rhythm fast and relentless. Each time it fired, the hull shook violently. Water washed over the deck, but the gunners did not stop. One shell struck the enemy warship accurately. Fire erupted brightly, smoke rising tens of meters high. Command post on shore cheered over the radio. "Target hit. Keep firing. Maintain pressure." Coastal units coordinated. From the fortified cannon emplacements, shells exploded continuously. The shriek tore the wind, echoing off the cliffs like thunder. The ground shook in pulses. Dust flew everywhere. High above, 2 Vietnamese fighter jets took off again, flying low, launching a cluster of short-range rockets at the approaching enemy ships. Explosions followed explosions. Water shot high, light reflecting on the sea, making the scene blaze red like a furnace. An enemy ship listed sharply, then stopped amidst the thick smoke. Cheers sounded again, but no one dared stop fighting. Every time one target was eliminated, 2 more ship silhouettes advanced. On the pier, the coordination officer remained calm, his voice ringing clearly over the radio. "All naval artillery forces concentrate fire on the southeast. Prepare for full counterattack salvo." In an instant, dozens of cannon barrels simultaneously lowered, locking targets. A short order sounded. Fire. The blast merged into a single sound, fierce, relentless, and echoing across the coast. The ground shook like an earthquake. The water surged up, as if pulled from the seabed. Fire, smoke, and were merged into one. Cam Ranh still lived. And now, it was their turn to counterattack. The sound of battle had lasted for hours. The entire Cam Ranh sky was swallowed by smoke. Heat from the explosions thickened the air. Every breath tasted of iron and ash. Though utterly exhausted, Vietnamese soldiers did not leave their posts. From the temporary command post, the chief officer received new intelligence. Coastal radar just detected an enemy landing craft formation entering the Bay Area. His voice was rough. "Don't let them touch land. Concentrate firepower on the north sector. Prepare interception." The remaining frigates simultaneously changed course. Engines roared. The sea surged. Cannon barrels traversed straight toward the new targets. On the horizon, the silhouettes of the landing craft slowly appeared, faint in the smoke and firelight. From the shore, rocket artillery batteries opened fire first. Individual long volleys of shells flew across the sky, shrieking like a gale. Just seconds later, the sea surface where the enemy fleet appeared exploded in clusters of white light. Waves slammed the shore like relentless drumbeats. The enemy landing craft formation countered immediately. Long-range cannons fired individual large rounds, exploding near the water surface. A Vietnamese frigate was tossed sideways, the deck drenched, but the combat crew held their post. The cannon at the ship's bow slowly traversed, then roared, firing a counterattack round. A column of white smoke rose vertically. The shell flew off, striking a landing craft precisely. Flames shot up high, obscuring the entire horizon. Cam Ranh base shook continuously. Flares were fired up, brightly illuminating the sea surface. Against that light, the enemy's high-speed boats were clearly visible closing in on the shore. Targets entering prohibited zone. Activate tertiary defense line. From the sandshore, multiple automatic cannons opened fire. Rounds sprayed into long streaks, like lines of light connecting the sky and sea. The sea surged up. Water and fire merged into a blazing red-grey color. An enemy boat caught fire. Another still charged, then was struck directly. The blast made the water surface rise in a high column, tossing up bright metal fragments. Despite the echoing roar, Vietnamese soldiers continued to load, fire, and hold their ground. On the bridge, the final command of the counterattack sounded short and clear. Do not let anyone set foot on this land. The entire base responded with explosions. Ships, cannons, and men moved in rhythm, creating a massive, surging power. The waves struck harder, but could not extinguish the blazing firelight from Cam Ranh. Late afternoon, the sun was a red halo, hidden behind the thick smoke layer. The Cam Ranh Sea was no longer blue, it was dark, thick with oil, ash, and hot swells. But the fighting had not yet ceased. On the shore, the defensive cannons continued to open fire. Continuous explosions made the ground shake as if breathing. Fire from distant blasts reflected onto the cliffs, making the entire region seem ablaze. Offshore, the enemy fleet formation began to fall into chaos. Ships struck by rounds burned. Black smoke spiraled up, covering the sky. A few ships turned around, trying to pull back out of range. But Vietnamese coastal cannons continued to chase with accurate shell clusters. On the command ship HQ-016, the captain yelled over the loudspeaker, "Maintain range. Order the entire fleet to counterattack simultaneously." All Vietnamese frigates simultaneously changed direction, forming an arc around the enemy fleet. Multiple blazing red streaks rushed from the ship decks, turning the sea surface into a fire net. The rapid explosions made the water surface shake continuously. An enemy ship was struck by a direct hit. The hull exploded. The blast pressure spread, creating reverse waves, causing other ships to collide. The sea surface seemed to shatter into hundreds of blazing fragments. In the air, 3 Vietnamese fighter jets dove, supporting the naval fleet. Curved streaks of fire tore the sky, connecting sea and clouds. 2 missiles launched, striking the command area of the enemy warship, exploding brightly like the sun in the late afternoon. Target eliminated from formation. Continue closing in. Every command echoed in the radio, mixed with the shriek of wind and engine roar. The Vietnamese ships advanced slowly but surely, forcing the enemy to retreat. The sea surface boiled from the continuous artillery barrages. On the distant shore, smoke from the fuel depot still rose high, covering the sky. But in that faint red glow, the flag on the pier still fluttered fiercely in the sea wind. It swayed, badly torn, but had not once fallen. Amidst the suffocating air and fire smoke, the Cam Ranh chief officer's voice echoed over the regional radio system. All forces hold the line. Do not let them take half a meter of land. Shouts of clear rang out along every frequency, merging into the relentless sound of cannons, waves, and wind. Cam Ranh base, after hours of shaking, still stood amidst the sea of fire, like a slab of steel in the storm. The sky darkened. Smoke clouds from the fires mingled with the clouds, staining the entire Cam Ranh sky dark red. Sea wind carried hot air and the acrid smell of gunpowder. The base was still fighting, explosions still sounded steadily. Individual fire flashes still flared in the darkness. On the command deck, Vietnamese officers were sweeping the electronic map. A streak of new signal appeared to the south. The Chinese reinforcement fleet was closing in, more than double the first fleet. The chief commander's voice lowered, pressing each word. Don't let them link up. All ships ready. This strike decides it. The captains immediately confirmed. Each Vietnamese ship changed course, forming an L formation, blocking the bay entrance. The sea frothed, engines roared. Waves crashed the hulls like war drums. In the sky, flares were fired up, brightly illuminating a wide sea area. The enemy ship silhouettes appeared clearly in the dazzling white light. Without waiting another second, coastal cannons opened fire first. Dozens of shells exploded. Light reflection made the water bright as day. The enemy countered fiercely. Artillery shells fell like rain, exploding amidst the Vietnamese formation. A frigate was strongly shaken. Water flooded the compartment, but sailors still tried to stabilize the ship. On the right flank, HQ-011 traversed its cannon, firing 3 continuous rounds, striking the lead enemy ship. A column of black smoke rose vertically, firelight reflected into the clouds like a mirror of hell. Other ships immediately fired support, creating a dense net of shells. The Camran sky blazed brightly, red-orange sparks interwoven with white smoke, creating a scene both magnificent and suffocating. From the mainland, long-range artillery batteries also entered the fight. The blast sound echoed from the shore, followed by the roar of the waves. Shell clusters rushed off, slicing the darkness, striking precisely the center of the enemy formation. The sea surface exploded. Water columns rose higher than the ship decks. Targets hit repeatedly. "They are breaking formation," an officer yelled over the radio. The chief commander replied concisely, "No retreat allowed. Continue to press the attack." A volley of rockets launched from the Vietnamese frigates, the sky flaring like a fireworks night. But instead of cheers, there was only the cold shriek of metal. Seconds later, a chain of explosions spread across the sea. Water, smoke, and firelight merged into a single color. Flares slowly dimmed. Only flickering red halos reflected on the waves. The enemy fleet was scattered. A few remaining ships tried to pull back, leaving behind dozens of burning specks floating on the water. In the radio, the coordination officer's voice echoed hoarsely. "Camran still stands. We have held the line." Night fully covered Camran. Smoldering fires from the blasts cast flickering light like red stars on the sea. No border remained between sky and water, only smoke, fire, and the roar of ships still fighting the waves. Inside the base, exhausted soldiers were everywhere, but no one sat down. They moved shells, loaded cannons, refueled, suppressing the smoldering fires. Commanding officers were still stationed by the map. Short, concise orders sounded steadily over the radio. "Hold defensive positions. No deep pursuit. Watch for long-range missiles." Offshore, the sky suddenly flashed brightly. 3 curved fire trails rushed in from afar, a final enemy missile attack wave. Base radar caught the signal in an instant. A sequence of warning sounds echoed. Then simultaneously, coastal air defense launchers opened fire. Defense missiles soared up, leaving blazing white halos behind. 1, 2, then 3 explosions flashed in midair. The enemy warheads shattered before they could hit the ground. Burning fragments fell into the sea, crackling like an iron rain. Cheers erupted across the entire base, not long, but loud. Everyone knew they had passed the most terrifying moment of the day. Over the radio waves, the chief commander's voice was hoarse but full of calm. "All units report damage. Maintain defensive formation level 1. We still have a mission." Replies echoed, tired but firm. Each ship sequentially turned off combat lights. Only the red warning light flickered. The sea slowly calmed, but the heat from the smoke still lingered. On the pier, a few soldiers stood silently looking out at the water. They said nothing, only the gentle lapping of waves, the wind blowing through the scorched steel frames. High above, the flag still flew tattered, scorched, but still stood tall in the darkness. From afar, the enemy fleet's flashes gradually disappeared beyond the horizon. They had withdrawn. Camran Base, after a day of hell, still existed, not intact, but unyielding. Inside the command bunker, a faint yellow light shone on the chief officer's tired face. He looked up at the screen, where 3 short words still flickered. "Defense holds." His voice echoed slowly through the system. "Camran Base mission complete." Outside, the sound of waves gently lapped the pier. The night fell silent, but everyone understood this was only a pause. The storm still waited on the horizon.